This week is all about kit bashing with our Greeble parts. I'm going to go over a brief history of kit bashing. I'll talk about adding our Greeble library to the content browser in Maya, and then I'll use Greeble parts to kit bash details onto my model. So this week we're going to be kit bashing, and I'll be going over some techniques that I use to kit bash a model. But first, let's talk a little bit about the history of kit bashing. The Greeble parts that we've made can essentially be used in two ways. You can either use them as plant-on details to just add to the surface, or you can kind of build assemblies of several parts that are put together in a way that suggests they have some kind of function. Our practical modeling forefathers were masters of building these assemblies, and I've learned a lot by recreating those models for the Star Wars films, almost in the same way that a painter learns by recreating a master's work. There's something so magical to me about seeing these pieces individually and then seeing how they work together on the finished model. This area on the back of the Falcon is one that I particularly admire. You can see the level of complexity here, even though it's not clear what any of these mechanisms actually do. You can also see the way that the Greebles enhance parts that were built by scratch, especially in the way that these tank decks kind of meet up with the round vents and make it seem like it's part of one large engine. Also note how here on the bottom, large blocky parts are used and detail parts are added on top. I use this technique a lot when detailing the Star Destroyer for Rogue One. Many of the details on the original filming miniature were meant to be seen from far away, and as we moved the camera in closer, a secondary level of detail was required. Sometimes assemblies were molded and cast for reuse, and the model builders got a lot of mileage out of them. Here is a modern model builder's assembly of what they call the 8-rad plate, since the largest element comes from this model kit. This plate was used 3 times on the Millennium Falcon, once on the top rear port quarter and on the upper and lower jaw sections. The central part of the 8-rad plate can also be seen on the 3-foot Star Destroyer's side trench. This plate, called the Tiger Plate, named for this model kit, is used 3 times on the Falcon's sidewalls, and even saw some use on the Battlestar Galactica. Finally, there's the Matilda Plate, named for this model kit, which also appears on the sidewalls of the Falcon, as well as the side trenches of the Star Destroyer. The lesson to be learned here is, if you build an assembly that you really like, export it out and reuse it. So now let's open up Maya and get started with some kit bashing. So I have my 3 parts here in Maya, and I'm going to want to put them into a library. So first thing I'm going to want to do is go to the project window, create a new project, and let's just call it Greebles, and just hit accept. And now when we go out here to our file system, I'll just go to Maya Projects, Greebles, and I'm actually going to put these into the assets folder. So first thing to do is grab the 3 Maya ASCIIs that we exported, and then I'll just copy and paste them over here. And then I'm also going to want to grab this Maya Swatches folder over here. And this basically is where it stored all the thumbnails that we captured last week. So back in Maya, if we go over to Windows here and go to General Editors, we see this new content browser available in here. So let me just navigate Documents, Maya, Projects, Greebles, and Assets. And now you can see we have our 3 parts in here. And if we right click on these, we can either import them or bring them in as references. And you can see if we click on the parts, we can see their name and a little bit of info about the file. But rather than navigate to this folder every time, I'm going to want this to be easy to access. So I'm going to just right click on here and click Add to Favorites. And now if we go somewhere else and then we go over to Favorites, you can see we've created a shortcut to this area. So the problem I have is that since this is a pre-recorded lecture, I don't have all the parts that you guys have made over the past week. So I actually went ahead and made a few of my own. I basically just went through the reference images and created parts that that I thought were interesting and that I definitely wanted to use. So this one is actually from Greeble 01, and this one is actually from Greeble 04. And this part is one that I was going to assign, but it ended up being a really complicated shape to model, and I didn't want to torture one student with such a difficult part, so I went ahead and modeled this myself, and I'll provide this to you guys this week. So now if I go back out here, and let me load this as well, I can grab these 3 parts that I also made, copy and paste. And if I go in here to the content browser, you can see that those parts are in there as well. So the content browser is a really organized way to work, and it's easy to see the thumbnails and bring these parts in if you set everything up ahead of time. But to be completely honest, I don't usually work this way. Usually I'll have all my parts in my scene, and then I'll just pick and choose the parts I want to use. So since I don't have the benefit of you guys modeling all those additional parts that I assigned, I'm going to actually use my parts library that I built for the Millennium Falcon. But these parts were built kind of with a different philosophy. If we look at a piece like this, you can see how low res this geometry actually is, and there's no supporting edges. And that's because I basically built this thing for a real-time application. But since this week is about kit bashing, I'm going to use these parts how they are for now and ignore the topology, and then after the fact I'll go in and fix up the parts that I did use. I'd also like to mention that if you've purchased other Greeble parts on the internet from another artist, you're welcome to use them this week as well. Okay, so now here I am in my Space Vet scene, except I've got all my Greeble parts in here to start kit bashing. But you'll notice I've also modeled out a few of the custom pieces of the model. For example, these kind of blocky engine parts and this kind of intake area for the engines. And you can see that I've maintained the pivots on these fins so they can kind of be rotated like this. Might be a set-driven key or something that I want to add later, so I just kind of gave myself that option for now. But yeah. So I've also modeled out the rear view mirrors over here on the doors, as well as the door handles, and also this kind of radiator piece in the front, except I have modified it to kind of align with the hood. It used to be straight across. And I've also built out these stick pieces in the front, just added some detail to them. And I'm not using any techniques that I haven't covered already, so I just figured that I would do these off camera and get ready for today's lesson. But the reason I did model these parts out is that I wanted them to be kind of represented, so we would have some parts to kit bash around. Basically, we want to know what these parts' footprint is, so when we are adding additional greebles, that we add them in the right spot. So one of the first things I want to do is actually take these motion-based pieces that are in my blocking model and just grab the groups, duplicate them, and unparent them, and then I'll put them in a little group called temp and a layer called temp, and that way if I hide the SV, if I hide my blocking model, and I can toggle those on and off just so I can see the footprint of them as well. I didn't model them out nice though because we're going to be modeling them later, but I just want to see where they are. So yeah. So on the concept, there's these pieces that kind of attach to these sticks, and they kind of have this cylindrical shape. And when I first saw this piece among my model pieces, I definitely thought that that would be a good candidate for that area. So what I do is I grab this and duplicate it and unparent it just to get it out of my Greeble hierarchy. And then I'll just move it and align it with the stick, and I might want to go to the back view just so there's less stuff in the way. And if I just kind of line it up with the concept, you can see how that is working. And that's already looking pretty cool, but I think I am going to want to scale it up a bit so it lines up with that radiator a little better. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of align it with the radiator. And then let me go to the back view again, and I'll just scale it until it lines up. Cool, so that's already looking pretty cool. Let me assign my Greeble mat, which I'll be doing, to all these pieces as I go. And I also kind of, when I saw this piece, had it in mind to kind of add kind of this plate to the bottom, almost as to like protect the engine. Like cars usually have this to kind of protect the engine if you're going over some kind of a pothole or something. But I'll just align that out here like this, and then I'll assign my greeble mat. And now we're kind of starting to play with some shapes here. And the idea here is that we sort of look at the shapes of these parts and kind of reimagine what their function would be. I want to use this piece to kind of act as like the hub for my engine motion bases. So I'll just put these into place like this, and then I'll play with the scale a bit. I think that's going to be too big. So maybe something like that. And then I can kind of move that in there. And I'll scale it up a tiny bit. And then that kind of gives us an interesting shape to play off of. We might want to make some holes in that motion base piece when we build it, just to kind of show off the detail behind it. I'll duplicate that piece and scale it the other direction, just to line it up with these back engines as well. And I'll come back to that area later, but I think I want to put this, use this piece as kind of the pan that goes underneath the driver and passenger seat. So let me move that down a bit, scale it into place. I'll go ahead and assign make sure it's a little close to the center line. It's not make sure it's not crossing the center line, and then it's giving us kind of a cool shape underneath there. Actually, let me grab all this stuff that's on the left side, and I'll create an L greeble null. And then that way we can quickly grab everything and mirror it, and then see how things are behaving with each other. Like this plate piece, for example, I think needs to be moved over a little bit. But you can see I have this big kind of open space underneath here, and I'm going to want a big blocky piece to just plug it up, and then we can add detail on top. So I think I'm going to take this large engine piece, flip it over, and I'll use this as like kind of my main piece down here. Snap it to the center and just kind of scale it up a little bit and align it. Scale it down a little bit. Move it down. So now let me assign my greeble mat. So we've blocked up the hole now, but those kind of half-cylinder pieces on the side don't really integrate with the pieces I've used already. So I think I'm going to want to cover them up. And I'll use this piece because it's a nice blocky shape. And I'll just rotate them into place. And I'll just place it over those half-cylinder parts, assign my greeble material, and just kind of crash it through. That's a pretty good spot. So you can see everything's shifted around a little bit, so I'll need to move my parts just a tiny bit. I'm going to put this in a group called C greeble null. So I think I'll use this engine piece to kind of fill the hole behind the radiator area, because it's a nice round detail, and it can align with that round part of that central plate. Because this process is really about looking at the shapes of these parts and kind of just assembling them together and suggesting more of a function. Assign my greeble material. Yeah, now that's looking pretty cool. Put it in the C greeble null. And let me reduplicate the L greeble null over. Oh, so now that's given us kind of a cool shape there. So I'm going to want to block off that front area, kind of behind the lights. Block up this hole there as well. So let me find, just looking around for a piece here. Actually, so I think I'm going to use this round piece here. I'll just align them like this. And I'll rotate it around so that little notch area is off to the side. We can see it a little better. Assign my greeble material. And then I think I'll use two of them actually. So I'll just duplicate it like this, scale them up a little bit. And then I can go to my kind of back view and align them with the cylinder there. That kind of gives us kind of blocks off that area a little better. So I'll use this piece as well to act as kind of a blocker. Since we can see into that side of that those three kind of vent holes, we can add this piece there, and it's just act as a detail we can see through to that part. Just gives it a little bit of interest back there. And I'm going to want to block off this sort of front area where the headlights will go eventually. I'll show you guys how to build headlights later, but I think I'll use this kind of interesting plate piece. But the thing about this front area is that the angle is kind of it's an odd angle. So I'll scale this down. This piece up. And move that into place. I'll flip it around this way. So what I'm going to end up doing with this part is kind of playing with the angle. I'll use a lattice to kind of match that angle. And that's the cool thing about these parts, is you don't have to be afraid of doing something like this to them. It's like they have a certain level of detail. Let me turn my symmetry off. Move this piece up and this piece back. They have a level of complexity to them, but then if you kind of stretch and skew them around, it doesn't really affect them too much. So let me move that piece back. We have a nicer intersection there. So that's cool. It kind of it matches that angle, and it also kind of blocks off that area so we can't see through it. And when we add the headlights there, I think it'll look pretty cool. So now let me find a plate piece to kind of block off the rest of that radiator, and I think I'll use this one. And let me just take it and I'll just angle it, match that, kind of match the angle of the radiator itself, and then I'll snap it to the center. You just kind of scale it up. See, I'll end up playing with this piece quite a bit. So I want it to block off the area properly. But I also like seeing those bolts. So I might end up playing with the scale a bit more. We'll set the scale back to 1. And I'm going to isolate these pieces just so I can match these a bit better. And I'll just scale this up. I'm going to scale it up till I see those bolts on either side, actually. Looks pretty cool, but I don't like that intersection there. Getting closer to what I want. You can kind of see those bolts there. Actually, I think I'll flip this around, and then I'll scale it up a bit more. And I can just move this back, and I'll actually move it up a bit. You see we're getting like a weird intersection there, but I don't think it's going to be too noticeable. We might block it off with a hose or something later. So cool. I think I'm pretty happy with that piece being there. So let me organize everything into the hierarchy. Organize everything into my agreeable groups. I think I'm going to need a block. Grab this piece to kind of add some detail to that flat area there. A lot of these agreeable parts have kind of areas that are just flat or something, because you know they're model kit parts and that's how the model will glue together or something. But I like to take those as like opportunities to add detail, like adding this sort of pipe piece there kind of makes for a cool detail. So a lot of it is kind of looking at the work you've done and keeping a list in the back of your mind of areas that are going to need that extra level of detail. And then as you look at the parts, you might find that piece that would be perfect for that area. So I'm going to use this piece to kind of block off the hole. And what's cool is I have that group of, it's called finals, that basically is my space vet. I can actually hide it and just see the greebles themselves. So let me duplicate this piece over. And now I've got this kind of thing that looks almost like a shock or something. But I can just align those up there. And I think I'm going to still want to block off the area behind those pieces. I'll use these pieces here. I'll use this piece here. So let me turn off my finals group and then snap this piece here and then rotate it around. And actually I want those bolts to be on the front, so let me take those around like this. Scale that piece up. And sticking through the hood a bit, so let me move it back. Just move it to about there. Scale it up. Scale it in. Material. Let me angle that down that way. I'll duplicate that piece and just kind of angle it so it points down, and then we'll just use that piece as another blocking part. So really the sole purpose of those pieces is just to block holes. See, I've got that open hole there. So I'm going to I think I'll take this piece. I like this piece because it's got that kind of arch to it. So rotate it into place roughly, and then just fix the values. And then just move it over this way, move it down. Kind of align it with that piece. And assign my greeble mat, and then it looks pretty good. You'll notice as you do more and more of this that you get more and more familiar with your library, and because of that you get faster and faster at making these decisions and coming up with ideas. I'll take this plate piece, which I already have there, set the scale back to 1, and just move it into place. I like this, I like to use pieces, especially plate pieces that have holes in them. It creates interest by giving the assembly a bit more depth. And having that level of depth really makes things feel more mechanical, because you don't want it to look like it's just a box with detail on it. You want it to seem like behind every part is another part underneath it. And creating the illusion of that is what's going to make your model seem real. So let me put everything in the left side, and then I'll just duplicate it over again. You can see what we're dealing with here. So I don't think I'm digging how that's looking. Just gonna add a bit more. Actually, this piece is really cool. Let me see if I can work this in up here. Just flip that upside down. Flip it this way. And then we can kind of just align it with other stuff that's in here. I scale it down. I kind of like how it's intersecting with those bumps on that other piece. Actually, let's just cover those circular bits up. And what's cool about this is it also kind of adds that level of depth. Let me scale it in a bit. Just pull it in. Move these parts forward. Actually, I don't mind so much if those intersect a little bit. Move those pans a little closer, the floor pans. And then I think I'm pretty happy with the front end. So let's move on now to the back end. So now onto the back. Let me duplicate this piece though. We'll reuse what we can from the front, since we do have like this same kind of engine setup on the front and back. But I'll rotate that around, so I'll take these parts as well. But I've rotated that main piece around, and I think I'll leave these parts kind of as they are, and I'll cover up those awkward intersections at a later time. So now let me look at some other parts I want to use. Well, I could use this as kind of a drive shaft that like connects the front and back half. So let me just rotate this around. And then I'll make sure it's in the center, and I'll just scale it up and scoot it this way. I want to create that drive shaft kind of look, just to connect the parts, make them look like they work together. And I'll assign my greeble mat to there. But I want to add some more detail on the shaft itself, so I think I'll actually use this piece. And then just pull it down here. And I like that this piece has these kind of bolts on them. Bolts are a great way to just immediately give anything a sense of scale, because we all know how big a bolt is. So let me just put that there. And actually, I think I'll use 2 of them. I'll just rotate them so they're kind of facing opposite directions. I can move that piece out as well. Put my greeble mat on these pieces. And actually, let's isolate these so I can align them well. Cool. So that's pretty much aligned. And that looks pretty interesting. I like that. Scale that up to give these pieces maybe just a little more breathing room. Looks pretty cool. Let's move it out. Awesome. So that kind of connects the front and the back a little better. Let me duplicate this piece as well, but I'll actually, this piece would be a good this will be a good fit to line up with here because it's got that similar arch shape. See my driver in there too. It's just chilling. I mean, it's just that's kind of cool. Kind of continues that that shape there. And for that piece, I think I'm going to actually use this top grill piece. This part is actually the headlights of the Millennium Falcon, which is why that hole is cut in there. The actual Ferrari piece that it comes from doesn't have the hole, but I got to work with what I have. But I think I'm going to actually trim off these side parts of it. And that's another thing that I want to make sure you guys are aware of. It's okay to like hack these pieces apart and cut them up, and because at the end of the day, we in the practical model shop days, they did that all the time. They used to cut parts and cast them, and they modified these parts all the time. So we are totally free to do that as well. So I think I'm going to use these pipes that I have for my blocking model, but I'm going to actually kind of make them a little cleaner. So I'm going to create a torus, and I'll just transfer the attributes from one to the other. And then I think I need to adjust the radius here. Yeah, that looks better. I'll just make it have 12 sides instead of the 20 that it comes with. Let me delete those faces I don't need. And now I'm going to move this out a bit because I'm going to actually make some kind of a cowl or housing for this. And then I'll move it out quite a bit as well. And then move that edge in. I'm going to actually align it with this this kind of ribbed detail on I'll align it with this rib detail on the this kind of manifold piece. Let me bevel this edge real quick. I'll need 0.5. And then let's go ahead and duplicate this. Kind of just align it again with those ribs there. I'll stick them in L greeble null. And make sure these all go into the center greeble null. So now I need a part for that to kind of intersect with. I'll use this part as kind of the side of it. And really at this stage, I'm using these parts to kind of build a box. And I easily could have defined what this box was at first, but I'm kind of letting these parts inspire me and seeing how they intersect with each other and kind of letting that define the way that I assemble things together. And that's kind of a way to go beyond your own design skills, is seeing what happy accidents happen when you go through this process. And then we can go through afterwards and add details on top of what we've done. Put it in L greeble null. You could use that piece. Let me use this piece now. Actually, I like these tank deck pieces too, because they've got a nice amount of like hatches and vents. I think I'm gonna do this back here. Actually, I'm not sure I like how that looks. Let me agree on that. Yeah, it's a little too complete of a part. But I will use it, let's use it down here instead. Let me align it there. It kind of becomes a cool detail for the back. Let me build out the rest of the back though. Put it in C greeble null. I really want to use this piece. This is a piece I like a lot. So let me see what I can do here. It's 90 degrees. And then I'll do 90 degrees here. Let's move it kind of to the end here. Snap it to the center. And maybe I can scale this up. I kind of like how that's working up at the top there. So now we're getting something a little more interesting. Let me move this back to line that up. So it's starting to look cool. Let's take a look at my blocking real quick. Let me reuse these parts, but I won't rotate them. I'll just kind of leave them the same orientation. That's cool. That's looking pretty good. Reuse this piece as well. I'll rotate it by 180 though. Actually, I think yeah, I'll delete those parts. I want to create more of a linkage looking things here, since these are attached to our motion base. So I'll use this piece, which is actually part of a kind of a tank tread system. And I'll duplicate this and rotate it around. What's cool is now we're kind of intersecting with that other piece, and it kind of makes it look like it's all part of the same piece. And move that forward a little bit. So I like how that linkage looks, but maybe we can then use this piece sort of just flip it over. And then you can see we're almost aligning with those other pieces there. So let me try and work on that a little bit. Align those parts, and then we can just scoot this part back. Assign the greeble mat. Let me just move this out so it's sitting on top. Now let me just move all these parts forward so it kind of sits in that arch. And then I'll just duplicate this assembly over and stuff it inside that arch as well. Cool, so now we got kind of a cool, almost linkage type thing going on in between the two wheels. Let me duplicate these parts as well. Just rotate them around. But there's kind of like a weird intersection happening, so I'm going to scoot these over so we can still see those two bolts on the side. I could even scale these down or something. Now I'm going to use this piece to kind of make this side here. I think I might angle it to kind of match the bottom of that tank deck. Let me just work on that a bit. I'll align them there. That's kind of cool. I might have to resolve that a little better later. Let me take this piece. It's got a nice angle to it. To the sides of it anyway. And let me just rotate that in the right scale. Rotate it the right way, and then place. It's kind of a nice base to add parts on top of. So let me then, let's use this part. Like these angled sides that we're using here. Kind of match those up. Put the greeble mat on it. That's starting to become interesting. So now I can kind of adjust this piece. Just maybe put it flat there. Straight up and down, I mean, not flat. Actually, this piece has this great cylinder on the end of it. Let me rotate this around. And then maybe we can, yeah, we can move that like this. Oh, now we're getting kind of cool intersections with these pipes as well. Let me actually, I'm going to grab these four though, and I'll grab these edges, fill the hole, and then I'm going to just extrude these down. Just so we can intersect them without worrying about seeing the open edge. That's kind of a cool look. I like how that turned out. So now I can maybe align these cylindrical parts. I actually use this piece. Rotate this 90 degrees, and then I'll just intersect this with this other plate piece. Kind of align the two cylinders. And let me actually scale that down a bit. And then I'll move that this way. So that's kind of given us a little more visual interest there. Everything's lining up a little differently, a little better, I think. So that's kind of cool. So you can see that a lot of this process is actually just kind of looking around at pieces for that moment of inspiration where you decide where you want to add things. So for this shape here, I think what I'm going to want to do is actually create just a box to fill the void. I'll just move this edge up there, move this face up, move this one down, move this one back. And now let me drop in some edge loops. And then that way I can kind of just scale those in there. And I'll just go ahead and extrude this up, and we'll just cover up our shape there. But I don't want to cover the ribbing up too much there, so what I'm going to do is actually drop in an edge loop there, and then I'll just delete these faces, and this will become like a left side piece. And let me actually move this angle down, or move this face down to create that angle. Move these pieces out. Just kind of cheat them in with the scale. So what's kind of cool about using like a blocky element like this is, let me fill this hole, is that when you use a big blocky shape like this, I mean, you automatically block in all the holes, but it's kind of a piece you can add detail on top of. So I think this would be a good piece to kind of just put right on there. And then let me put the right angle in. And then maybe I can actually rotate it kind of like this angle here. And then we have, it's kind of just like a detail on the surface, but have some opportunities to do some cool stuff there. So let me look around my parts once again. Trying not to use the big Falcon library, and use the parts that we had made for our class when I can. This is a good piece to use. Like I said, I love using parts that have bolts on them, so just go ahead and do that there. And then I can just scale it in. Just throw it in the bottom there. It's kind of adding to that assembly a bit. Let me scale this piece up. I like creating little cavities to add detail in. And you just add detail parts inside these cavities, and it adds that level of depth that I talked about earlier. In this case, I don't think this is quite interesting enough. Yeah, I don't think this is quite interesting enough, so I'll stick it down here on the side of this tank deck. fix the rotation a little bit. So now that kind of adds a little bit to that area. Maybe that's like where some kind of filter lives or something. Oil filter. So I really like this piece. It's kind of a funky piece, but I think I could do something cool with it. Yeah, I don't know if I'm digging that too much. Put the Greeble mat on it. Maybe if I angle it. Nah, that's looking a little too weird. Let me see if I can find another option here. Put these in my left Greeble, no. Put these in my C Greeble, no. And let's duplicate the left side again. I got some parts that I didn't that's kind of weird. Why is it parented under there? So if you have parts that you haven't unparented from your Greeble group, just kind of check what's in the Greeble group once in a while. So this is another part of like a tank wheel, a tank tread. So, but I really like the shape of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my Greeble mat on it and just kind of position this in here. Maybe we could do something interesting with it. One of the reasons I like using parts with round elements on them is it gives you opportunities to kind of link things together with some other sort of mechanism or maybe hoses later on. Let me reset the rotation on this. And maybe we can do something cool where this all links together. Maybe we can make these holes kind of align together. And that way we duplicate it, and then we can align these holes as well. I get some kind of interesting there. Almost looks like a fan belt assembly or something. Scale this piece out. We can cover that intersection down there. Let me actually move this piece in as well. Put that into left Greeble null. Put those into C Greeble null. And then let me let's put this piece down here too. Actually, I think I'll put this piece up here on this flat surface up here. Just kind of add a little bit to it. And just scoot it back so it intersects and add the greeble mat to it. It's looking kind of cool. And we could use this vent piece back here. It's kind of a cool piece because when you use it this way, it's asymmetrical, so that kind of adds a level of realism to it, because not everything is perfectly symmetrical. Move it up there, and then I think what I'll do is actually take this back edge and just yank it back there. And then I could duplicate these parts, and then almost use them like they're hoses that are attached to this boxy shape, or pipe assemblies or something. Let me do another one on the bottom. Might have to scale it down a little bit. I'll actually scale it up a little bit. Cool. Those are already in L greeble null. Should move those all the way up there. Make sure we're filling all that space. We could duplicate that. Duplicate that part up there, but I kind of want to do something different up there, so this might be a good piece to use. Let me snap it to this corner and then move it up here. Scale it down. It's kind of a cool little detail to have there. So a lot of times when I'm looking at the library, I'm looking for a piece that could fill a certain spot, but I'm also kind of just looking for interesting parts, and then when I look back over at the model, I'll look at potential places to put those parts. Maybe I could use this cap for the back. Oh, this is actually a really cool piece. Let me try using this. To rotate this to the right angle, and then let me kind of align it with the rest of these cylinders. That's kind of cool. Let me move it back a bit. Put my greeble mat. But now I'm thinking that maybe this, put it in C greeble null. Now I'm thinking that this other plate is kind of making things too busy, so I'll delete that. And then I think I'll just let's create a new cube. And I'll just use it to block off this hole. And I'll actually end up only using that one face of it. Okay, so let me cut this edge across here. And then I'll just scale these verts in. Put my greeble mat on there. And we blocked that hole, but I want to add a little more detail inside there, so I'm going to create another cube. And we'll just create like a quick fin for the inside of this area. I'll do maybe 0.75. It's not quite a centimeter thick. I'll just make this kind of angled notch into it. Delete the faces I don't need. Scoot that back. Just split these edges and adjust the verts. Just kind of give us that beveled edge. Cut those edges in. Put my greeble mat and then smooth. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change the pivot to the center here, and then I'll just duplicate it around. Let's do -8, and just keep duplicating it. Shift D, delete that last one, and now we've got kind of this. Let me scale these in, scoot them back just a little bit. Cool, so now we got these fins back here. It's kind of a cool little detail. You organize everything together, and I'll go ahead and delete that cap I didn't end up using. And now let me find a cap for that top area. I really like this one. It's kind of got, it's more interesting. Put it in the center there, and we'll just align it with the top a bit. Maybe scale it in and put greeble mat on it. Cool, so that's kind of a nice detail there. Let me find some more. I'll use this kind of angled tank piece. See, it almost looks like a valve cover or something. Some kind of a gas tank. Just move that back there. Just assign the greeble mat to it. Cool, that adds a little bit to it. Let me pull this edge back. So we're definitely not having weird intersections there. Alright, let me find some more areas that need a little more detail. I've got these plates with bolts on them. Might be a good candidate for sticking on this flat surface here. Let me just rotate that, and then I'll just put them into place. The greeble mat on them, and then I can also use these up front too. So that adds that little bit of detail there. Let me put all this stuff into the respective hierarchies that it needs to be in. Reduplicate my L greeble null. So I'm looking for an opportunity to use these landing gear arms, I guess you would call them. But I'm not really seeing a place present itself. But those are good parts for adding kind of mechanical detail and linkage type of situations. These pieces are kind of cool to use. I could use them on here. Those like flat areas. Scale them down. It's kind of good. Greeble mat. Actually, let me move it to the proper side. I'll put it in my I've got that flat area back there too. Use this as kind of like, it's like a ceiling piece over here. Let's move that into place a little better. The greeble mat on it. Cool, just adds to that detail of that a little bit. Let me move it into place a little better. I think that area is going to be a lot of pipe work. We're going to cover that up with pipes later. So I missed that one. I'm going to actually make a greeble layer so I can hide them. And yeah, I think we're looking pretty good. I could even take these up further, block the rest of that hole. Cool. I think that's the end of this part. So I want to greeble out these engine parts and add a few more details that to places that I've missed. So I went ahead and actually modeled out these two manifolds on in the concept. As you can see, nothing fancy here. Just and I even reused some pieces from some of my other greebles. You can see the back section's just got more of those front-facing bolts. And I've also kind of modeled out these the secondary level of flaps that are in the concept. I'm not sure what I just drew them in there because I thought they looked cool, but I don't know if they're exactly functional. But anyway, I wanted to put those pieces in there to kind of inform where I put greebles. So let me take this piece and then we'll just lay it in here. Assign the greeble mat and all that. And it's okay if we kind of just crash it in. Take this piece now and then I'll just negative scale it up there. And so now we've got kind of a base level of detail on those, but I think a lot of the engine detail is going to be pipes and hoses, fuel lines and whatnot, just kind of like a real jet engine. So now I need a piece for the front. I think I'll just use this plate with rivets on it because we have a smaller area to cover up there. But let me just rotate that into place. And then I kind of just position it there. Put the greeble mat on it. And then just duplicate it down, negative scale it. And I think that's going to be good enough for the two engine bits, so I think I'll take care of the inside when we actually build the motion base. So I'll take care of detailing that area out. I'll find a cap for this area where the stick is kind of mounted, just to give it a little more detail. And I'll actually reuse this one from the back here. Really what we're doing at this stage is just looking for areas that look maybe a little too simple and seeing if we can add a level of detail and scale to them. And I really like this cap piece because it's got bolts on it. It's got that taper to the front of it. It kind of will lend itself well to this front stick piece. And I'll just, I'm actually going to match the scale so it's uniform. And then that's kind of a nice level of detail, I think. So what else can we add? We add all these parts into the L greeble null. can obviously if I move the animation, these greebles on the engines aren't going to move with it, but we'll take care of that later. So now let me see, what else can I add here? I'm going to add some detail to the area kind of behind the cockpit. I mean, this is kind of a cool piece. Interesting looking anyway. Let me move that in there. And just back in there like that. You can kind of just rotate that into place. So that just kind of adds a little extra level of detail back there. Let me see what else. So this tank deck in the back has these kind of vents. I think I want to just plug the back of those, so I'll just use this piece here. And let me rotate it. Just move it into place for now. Scale it down, and then I'll just duplicate it, just because it's just going to be back there, and just so you can kind of see something inside of there. Move it over a little bit. Cool. So that kind of adds a little secondary level of detail. Let me find another cap for this area too. Actually, I'll just use this one. And the reasons I like keeping the triangulation on the cylinders is you get to use it as like a pivot, place to snap your pivot to later. And let me actually scale this out so it kind of meets up. Put my greeble mat on it. Cool, so that looks a little more intentional. Make sure I'm parented in the right place. And I think I'll put this tank piece, I'll put it under those oh, and incidentally, I've been doing a lot of typing for this to do 90 degrees, but if you go into the tool settings, you can actually set a step snap on your rotate tool and turn it to relative and maybe do like 45-degree angles, and then you can kind of get those angles a little quicker. Kind of a different way of working, but I actually I did not use that functionality of the tool because I knew I would have to rotate things at odd angles, but it comes in handy. So let me assign the proper greeble mat on there, and then I'll just kind of intersect it there, put it in the L greeble null. And then one other thing that I noticed is that I have this piece in the blocking model. It's kind of a piece that's highlighted in the concept. It's this little wing here. So I'm going to just model that out really quickly. Scale this side in a bit. And then we'll add another edge loop here. Scale this front edge. And maybe you can even move this edge forward. And then I'm just going to extrude with an offset of 0.5 for this. Maybe 1. No, 0.5. And then just extrude it up. Delete that face. And we'll just drop in some edge loops here. And then for this, we'll just extrude in again with 0.5 offset. And now I've got this wing shape on there. So I'm just going to go ahead and unparent this. So I'm going to move it into place a bit more. I'll just grab it, unparent it, and then I'll just call this L greeble wing STM. And I'll just throw it in my L greeble null for now. So let me reduplicate my left side, and now you can see we're getting something kind of cool. I think we've got pretty good coverage at this point. As you can see, a lot of this is just tumbling around looking for places that need stuff. Oh, so the wing, I never addressed that area in there. I think I'm actually going to use this piece. I was eyeballing this piece earlier. But this is kind of a cool piece that we could use as like a hinge for the wing. And let me just go to the... I still got my snap step on, so I'm going to actually turn that off. And you can see the wing has a rotation of 24. So let me rotate this a little more by hand. That would actually be negative 66. So it would form like a perfect 90 degrees. And then I'm just going to move this, rotate it a little bit. And it actually looks like, I think I'm going to actually make two of these things. So I'll rotate this a little more. I'll line that up by eye. And I'll just scale it in and duplicate it up. And I can just scale these in a little more. Slide them back. And you can see it's kind of poking through there though. So I'm going to want to scale them in these two axes and then maybe just scoot them over a little bit. And just scoot them down. That's kind of cool. It just kind of gives the impression that there's a kind of hinge system inside there. So we put them in L Greeble null. And I think I'm going to call it good. So let me hide my Greeble layer, hide my scale man, and let me reduplicate this. And yeah. So that's pretty much where we're going to leave off this week. The one last thing we need to do is name our Greebles. So I'm going to go ahead and delete my left side copy. And the cool thing about this is since these Greebles are already all named, we can just go to our comment rename script, add the prefix of L for the left side, and add the suffix of SDM. And then the same in the center null, add the prefix of C, and add the suffix of SDM. And we can pretty much just parent these right into the SpaceVet group. Let me go ahead and delete my left side there as well. The one thing that is going to be different here is those pieces we added to the engines. So I'm going to just go ahead and make sure that they get parented to the right place. And then these two pieces go in rear engine. And now we have our parts that are animated properly. And I can go ahead and take this left side, duplicate and scale in -1. And now we have our SpaceVet fully greebled out. So for this week, I want you to take a pass at adding greeble details to your model. And if you have to model some custom pieces, go ahead and do that. But really what I'm going to be evaluating is your kit bashing. So this has been a shorter lesson this week, and that's because this kit bashing process really is less time consuming than modeling stuff from scratch. And it's a process that I use a lot in production, especially with ILM's huge library of models that have already been built. At the end of the day, we're creating assets for clients on very tight schedules, so recycling from other models and reusing parts when we can is very important to the process. So I hope you learned from watching me do this, and I hope you have fun doing it yourself on your own models. Guys, have a good week. So since we have a little extra time this week, I want to talk about modeling headlights. Headlights aren't something that's necessarily difficult to model, but they are something that's kind of difficult to get looking right at render time. So there's three basic components to a headlight. There's kind of this glass lens on the front, there's a metal reflector on the back, and there's a bulb inside. Now, the outside of a headlight is smooth, but you'll see that the inside of the lens actually has all this boxy kind of detail, and the function of that is basically to refract the light and help the headlight be brighter. But to actually have all this detail modeled in would be extremely heavy, so we're going to want to cheat it by using bump maps. Now you can see that I've got my headlight model in here. Let me just frame up on it. And I'll basically split the three components into 5 components, and that's because the shaders on each of the 5 components are going to be different. So I've got the bulb, which I've assigned this surface shader to, just to kind of give it that white light look. I've got the outside of the bezel, which I've assigned just a kind of generic metal. I've got the reflector, which is going to be chrome. Then I've got the outside surface of the lens and the inside surface of the lens as 2 separate pieces with 2 separate shaders on them. So in order to get the bump map, I've actually modeled this bit out here, and I've got it as this HL bake group. So you can see I've baked in a smooth, and that's because the method we'll be using for baking is a Maya software method, and it doesn't recognize smooth previewing. So if any of you are familiar with a games pipeline, you know that baking from high-res to low-res geometry is a pretty common thing. But we're actually going to be kind of cheating that system, because I want something very specific out of this bump map. I want this kind of back surface of it to be black, and then I want it to be a gradient to the very top, which is going to be white. Now I could probably try and bake a displacement map and do some fine tuning and get that result, but I like to use procedural shading and UVs to kind of get the result that I want. So what I'm going to do here is grab these, and I'm going to create a new surface shader. And let me just delete some history here. In the surface shader, in the out color, I'm going to create a ramp. And now if I go to texture mode here, you can see that I've got this gradient from black to white, but it's not really covering this mesh the way that I want. So what I'm going to do is actually go to the side view here, and I'll grab these 3 pieces, and then I'm going to want to go to the UVs, because right now in the UV editor you can see that these pieces are just UV'd head on. So I'm going to want to go to the side view, and I'm going to want to do a planar projection from this side. So normally I like to keep this keep image width height ratio thing checked, but for this I'm going to want to uncheck it. If I leave this checked and we just UV this as is, you can see that it's basically recreated what we're seeing here, but in the UV window. But if I turn this off and hit apply, you can see now that the lowest point of the mesh at the bottom here is at 0, and the highest point is at 1. So if we deselect this, now we're getting our gradient from black to white, and the part is looking kind of exactly how I want it to look. So now what we can do is, instead of baking this as height information, we can actually bake this as diffuse information. So how I'm going to do that is I've got this bake plane here, which I'm going to bake this diffuse information down. I'm going to want to change this from modeling to rendering, and under lighting and shading you'll see baking and transfer maps. Let me just reset everything here. So our target mesh is going to be this bake plane that I've created, and you can see it's already in here because I had it selected when I opened this window. But how to get it in there is I just select the bake plane, add selected. Now under source meshes, I'm going to want to grab these three that have the surface shader attached to them and add them here. And as I mentioned, we're going to be baking diffuse. So you can see there's a few options here. We're going to want the file format to be TIFF, and I'll just go ahead and define what I want here. You have to set TIFF down here as well, which is super annoying, but that's just how it works. And I'm going to call this Headlight Bump TIFF, and you can see I've already got it here, but we're just going to replace it. So there's a couple other things here. You can see the use Maya Common settings is checked, so let's look at what the Maya Common output is going to be. And the map width and height is actually 256. I'm going to want to bump this up to 1024 just so we have some more fidelity in it, but I'll leave the rest of these settings as they are. The one thing that I do want to uncheck is connect maps to shader. That'll basically create a new shader on the bake plane and automatically assign the new texture map that we bake to that, which isn't really what I want. So now that we've got this all set up, I'm just going to hit bake and close. I like to hit bake and close because when it's done baking, it'll close this window and it kind of lets you know that it's done. Of course, this will probably take a minute. Alright, so our bake is done. Now on my headlight, on the inner lens, what I've done is I've gone to my shader, and in the bump mapping, I've assigned this headlightbump.tiff file that we've just made. So if I turn on texture mode, which is 6 on the keyboard, you can kind of see the effect we're getting here. Now, the viewport isn't going to show the refraction that we're going to get at render time, but this is kind of just an indication of what the texture is going to look like. I'm actually pretty happy with how it came out. Let me frame up on this and you can kind of see what's happening. Now the Corvette actually has two different types of tail lights with two different types of patterns here. You can see that this pattern here looks very similar to the headlight pattern we just made, but here we've got this kind of checker pattern, and here we've got these concentric rings. So I've already gone ahead and created these patterns, and let me show you how I did it. So with this, I kind of just created this mesh of concentric rings, and as I mentioned before, I did have to bake a smooth into this for it to properly work. Otherwise it would be a very faceted looking cylinder. And then for this, I just created this by making a plane with a lot of divisions and extruding. But you can see that I've used the same technique on these two as this one. And you can see that these are the three planes that I baked down to. And you'll notice I overshot them just to kind of complete the pattern. So the one other thing that these taillights actually have are screws. And so I'm going to show you real quickly how I build screws. I think screws are something that I've seen many people actually overbuild. They don't need to be super high res to give the impression of being a screw head. So the method I usually use is I'll start with a cube, and then I'll just let me just isolate that. And then what I do is I'll need to go back to modeling over here. And then, but the first thing I do is actually do a smooth, and I'll do 3 divisions here. So this right now is actually very excessive, but we're going to be reducing this quite a bit. So I set my scale to 0.5 just to kind of give us more of a screw shape, and I'm going to go ahead and delete the faces down here. And then I'll grab this edge and just flatten it out and maybe scale it in just a little bit. So now we'll go to the top view, and I'll just grab these faces to kind of create the Phillips head shape. So now let me just extrude this in, and we'll do an offset of 0.05. Now I'll just kind of scale this down, and we'll move it down to maybe like there. So now I'll add a division in here to kind of support those edges, and now you see when we smooth, we kind of get the basic screw head shape. So I'm going to want to delete a lot of these edges, and I'm basically going to grab every other edge around this circle and delete. So let's delete those. You can also delete every other edge here. And I'm actually going to also, I forgot that edge. I'm also going to grab these edges here, and we'll do edge ring and collapse. So now we've reduced it quite a bit, but you'll see that if I smooth preview it, this corner's getting pretty soft. So I'm going to want to move these edges to kind of support these corners a little better. So I'll grab this edge and use the slide edge tool. I'm going to want to go to tool settings and make sure my use snapping is on, and then I'll just middle mouse drag. Do the same down here, middle mouse drag. And now for this side and this side. So now I've got a screw shape that I'm pretty happy with. So let me then assign my metal material that I had. And now if I move it over here, and actually let me scale it up a little bit. And can just kind of intersect it with this glass. I'm going to do it like this, and in this case I'm actually going to just extrude this down just to like there. And then I'll go ahead and I'll actually scoot this over just a little bit, and I'll duplicate it. And then we'll just eyeball it and duplicate again. So that's basically how I make screws. And now you can see that I've got my headlights and taillights. So I'm going to be providing these 3 bump maps that I've created to you guys this week, and if your guys' models happen to have headlights and or taillights, you're more than welcome to use these maps. Or you can use the transfer maps trick I just showed you to create your own. I fully acknowledge how much of a hack that method is, but it's a trick I actually use pretty often.